Now cheering for the final session, I am requesting Dr. Thangalakshmi Prakash, Indian Maritime University, Chennai, to please come up on the dais. Now may I request Dr. Joyashree Roy to please come up on dais. Dr. Roy is Bangabandhu Chair Professor, Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. May I request ma'am to deliver her speech on fast-growing countries' energy demand, technology and social change. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm really thankful to the organizers for inviting me and to share with them my past and the current research with the august audience. So what I'm going to present today is more of, just one second, how does it move? Here? Okay. So what I'll be doing is that I'll be setting the scene why we are discussing about the fast-growing economy at this time, and what are these fast-growing economies? How do we define the fast-growing economies? And I'll be discussing with reference to two countries. One is India, and the other one is Bangladesh. The reason is India was the fast-growing economy in the first 2 decades of 2000, and Bangladesh is the fast-growing economy which is aspiring to be the fast-growing economy from this decade in coming 2 decades. And I'll also mention about the other fast-growing economies of Asia, like China, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore, who were growing very fast during the last 4 decades of last century. So comparing these will give us an idea that what the new challenges are when we are talking about the global sustainable development. And I'll also mention about some of the social changes which are happening along with the demand, technology, and the policy which are needed for maintaining the sustainable development goals. So to set the scene, what I will say is that because we all are aware now that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in its spatial report of 1.5 has confirmed that scientific consensus that till now, since the post-industrial revolution, what the humanity is experiencing is 1 degree global mean surface temperature rise. And also we are seeing the consequences in terms of flooding, polar ice melting, and burning forest fires, and all these things can be related to 1 degree Celsius rise by now. And if you look into the 1.5, the Paris Agreement, then it says that to avoid any further dangerous intervention, what we really need is to stabilize at 1.5 degree. But given all the countries' pledges, as the questions were coming, that as the countries know that how they want to develop, so if we take what the countries want, then we know by 2030, there is going to be 3 degrees Celsius rise. So with 1 degree Celsius rise, we know what the consequences are. As the countries are aspiring for their, as I was hearing in the last session, that who is aiming for what kind of trillion size of the economy that leads us to 3 degrees Celsius rise. So there are the consequences which already is known. So if we aspire for those kind of development, then what is going to happen in terms of climate change and its impacts are almost known now to the scientific community. So what really matters is that in 1.5 report, it has been stated very clearly that what the world can make a choice about. So when we are saying that how we should be developing, so if that is the question, then the question is if we are considering climate change, stabilizing climate change as one of the criteria for sustainable development, that implies that we can take either of the development pathways. One is P1 pathway, where what we do is that these are the emission reduction curves, which shows that the emission need to peak very fast before 2030, and then it should be declining very fast. So this is what is P1 pathway and how you can reach there. So below it writes how you can reach. So you can manage your demand in different ways, and so that you can reduce your demand. And especially for the least developed countries, you allow some economic growth, and still you can manage by a very fast emission reduction. However, the brown color, what we see very little in the first diagram, which shows that, so you need to have high degree of afforestation program, which means that you need to absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the afforestation program. So this is one possibility. So when we are saying that how we should develop in future, so this is one of the future which has been envisioned globally, that this is a possible future. The other possibility, other extreme possibility, is that you decide that no, we cannot reduce our emissions, so we will continue our emission, but then we would postpone our emission peaking before, even by the end of the century, so by 2040 or 2030, and then we try to reduce our emission. If we need to stabilize this, so if we want this pathway for our development, then it says we need lot of carbon capture from the direct carbon capture from the air, or we need carbon capture and storage technology, so that we captured them and put it under the ground. But these are all called negative carbon technologies. But these technologies are not readily available on the shelf till now. So we are uncertain about these technologies, but theoretically these are possibilities. So So how we grow, if that is the question, then there are now scientifically given knowledge that how we can grow. Do we postpone and wait for unknown technologies to solve our future, or we deploy all the small technologies that we know in such a way so that the forestation can take care of that negative carbon emission and carbon sink? Or you can take middle of the road and have different kind of combination. So there are now these solutions which are told to the community. So if these are the futures, so whatever we do, one thing is very clear, that development can happen. There is no one denying the development, but emission has to peak very fast and has to reduce very fast. That is one of the conditions of sustainable development now. So there may be many definitions, but this is one of the primary condition now for sustainable development. So if we consider this, then really the question comes, so within this background, so emission has to has to peak very soon, and so there should be no emission, so less fossil fuel, no fossil fuel, or coal has to really, be stopped by yesterday. So these are the questions that we are facing for making sustainable development choices. So in this background, I'm going to say for the fast-growing economies of this decade, starting from this decade, what the new challenges are and what the earlier fast-growing economies did, and so how they are comparing their possibilities. So if you look at this, what I'm trying to say is that I was one of the authors of the Global Energy Assessment of 2012, and where we showed that actually, if you look into different countries, there are scientific evidences which shows that just talking about GDP growth, these dark black lines are the GDP growth, just talking about GDP growth does not increase the well-being of the people. So this is an index which measures the social welfare. So if you look into all the countries, it shows that the GDP after a threshold, income growth really does not lead to the well-being growth. So world has to decide what is going to be the index of humanity's progress. Should it be GDP, or should we be thinking of some other indices? However, what I want to say is that still, globally, we depend on GDP as an index of our development. And from that point of view, what I'm trying to say that who are the fast-growing economies? Any economy, when it grows at 7 to 10% annually, we call them fast-growing economy, and Bangladesh is now growing at 7% annually, and the target is 8 to 10% annual growth till 2041, because by then they want to become the developed country, and they have already achieved the developing country status from less developed country in 2017. So India was growing at 7% during the last 2 decades. So 2000 onwards, they were growing. China, Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia were growing at this rate during the 4 decades of the last century. So if we look at the India's emission, this is very interesting table, because although India has 17% of the global population share, it only contributes 5% of the global emission. So the per capita emission is very low. The question comes, how could India maintain, despite high population growth rate and despite high economic growth rate in the past 2 centuries, how could they maintain the low emission share? The answer is to be found in how India's economy is structured. So that can be a lesson learned for those countries who want to progress at 7 to 10% starting from this decade, because this is going to be, these next 2 decades are going to be very crucial, because globally the CO2 emission need to peak by these 2 decades by any means. So from that point of view, if you look into India, so when India was growing very fast, actually it did not depend on the manufacturing industry. It was depending on the services sector. And 60% of its GDP share was coming from services sector. And service sector is very low energy intensive compared to the manufacturing industry. And that explains why India could maintain a low emission share despite its high, fast economic growth rate. Secondly, you can see that in India, during the fast economic growth phase, right? I said that starting from 2000. So if you go back to 1970s, how the manufacturing industries were doing, if their economic activity was growing at 1%, their energy consumption was also rising at 1%. But from mid-90s, you can see that with energy efficiency improvement, that means technological change, what they could do, they could decouple their activity growth from energy growth. And from 2000, if you see, this decade which I said was really remarkable for India. How could they maintain 7% growth rate, but still low emission because of the energy efficiency improvement? Look at this, how energy per unit of GDP was declining in India despite its activity growth, because of its population growth and economic activity growth at 7%, but its energy consumption was growing at a much slower rate than the economic growth. So the energy efficiency in all the fast developing countries of the past century and this century defines how they could avoid a lot of emission despite their fast economic growth. And we think this is a good lesson for the fast-growing economies of this century who are going to be the least developed countries who will be growing in the next 2 decades. And we were trying to find out what the industries had been doing actually. And we found that industries had been changing their processes of production, they had been recycling materials, they were waste recycling, they were doing a whole bunch of things. And process change was a major innovation, engineering innovation they were introducing in the Indian industries, and also through collaboration from across the world. So that really explains why they could maintain their high economic growth, but with low energy intensity. And this also work with our students, which we could see that what was driving the industries to do all these. Because they were competing in the market globally during that high growth phase, because domestic economy was not enough, so they had to have their exportability, and they had to satisfy their consumer with lower price, and the government energy conservation measures, etc., were also playing a very important role, and energy price was rising at that time. So all these things led the manufacturing industries to innovate and make more technological changes. Besides the policy changes in terms of price, economic policies, the government was also giving many non-market incentive, like the energy award programs, environmental award programs in India, which is very popular among the industries, and they do compete for that because that increases their shareholders' image and also their business image. And where what is happening is that in this award program, participation of the industries are increasing continuously, and we took this data and wanted to see how much the industries are actually investing in reducing the CO2. They were investing in energy efficiency. We converted them into the carbon price, and then we could see that how much they were saving emission. So we could actually see that all these industries, aluminum, cement, chemical, iron, steel, pulp and paper, and textile, they were actually investing somewhere between $20 to $100 per CO2 carbon for making their industries competitive internationally. So Indian industries have been doing a lot, and if we do the econometric models, we can see that they were substituting energy through materials, through capital, and that's how they were trying to manage their energy efficiency. However, in the process, what has happened is that their material use has gone up. So material dematerialization and material use efficiency increase is now a major challenge for the Indian industries, but that's not only for Indian industries, for worldwide this is an important issue, how you can reduce the material use and you can make the energy efficiency of the Indian industries. So being encouraged by the industry's performance, Government of India tried to take lot of measures for managing the household energy demand. And if you look into this, then this shows that as the Indian households are becoming economically better and better, their demand for air conditioner, refrigerator, and different kind of energy using appliances are increasing. And it's increasing at a very fast rate. Again, this is a characteristic of a fast-growing economy. And so what we need to see as engineers, economists, and energy economists, that how despite this growth in demand, how the energy demand can be managed. So one way to do is that, which India government has done, like many other developed countries, we have the appliance standard, 5-star air conditioner, 7-star air conditioner. The bulbs are all now LED. So all these things, if you take, these appliance standards or building codes are there, application of which really makes the appliance demand increase, but then energy use decline. And that is also happening in India a lot now. But one thing we need to understand, if we look into the earlier one, then we see that air conditioning demand is going up, and IEA data shows that cooling demand is going to up very much. So what will happen to the earth if all electricity goes for air cooling? So whether the question comes, so should the countries like India and many other countries which are hot and humid should suffer health-wise in terms of hot and humid climate because we want climate to be stable? My answer is that no, that cannot be. And the answer is that we see that this is something which we developed, a human workability index. I'm not going to explain this, but this simply says that this red color shows that you should not be working if any day's temperature and humidity is in this zone, and you should be working 100% of the time if temperature and humidity is in this zone and if there is no adaptation. So this is relative humidity, this is temperature, and these are between, so 100% work zone, 75%, 50%, and 25% work zone, and no work zone. So if we look into this, then we just plotted the observed data for Kolkata city in 2015 in this humidity and temperature space. And we found for the month of May and June. This is the baseline. That means when there is no adaptation. So this means that in May and June, all the days are actually in no work zone. So without any adaptation, you should not be working if you follow the WHO's health standard. So what we tried to do was, we tried to give adaptation. So yes, we can change our clothing type, we can give indoor workspace, we can have shades, and so we can do all kind of things, but still we find that the 100% work zone are still not achieved by any. Only way how you can achieve this 100% work zone is if you give air conditioner. So what it simply means that air conditioning demand for health reason, for productivity reason, for hot and humid climate is going definitely to increase. And from that point of view, we did a study for all 4 mega cities for the ministry, and where we could show that actually for all these mega cities, how many days as of today in 2015 are in the no work zone without adaptation. And we tried to see the predicted climate change in coming years, and we could see that actually none of the days, all 365 days, will be in the no work zone if there is no adaptation. Adaptation can be in different ways, but so we tried to see that what kind of adaptation, if we give clothing adaptation, if you give shade, if you can, because you have to, it's not only about us, but also the outdoor workers, those who are working on the street, on the construction workers. So if you take everybody, then it simply means that, in 2015, last 25% of their workability, you cannot bring in unless you provide air conditioning, but that also costs a lot, and this is the cost if you just change the clothing. So these are the different cost ranges. So said and done, what it simply says is that for hot and humid climate, the demand for air conditioning is going to increase. So this is a challenge to the scientists and engineers, that how do you really manage these when you are living in a carbon constrained world and you have to take a decision, but then demand is inevitably going to increase because of health reason. So what really worrisome is about the electricity demand sector. So what really needs to be done is in the power sector, because the demand is growing at this pace. And if we take 2017, what was India's power sector, how is it doing? We see that coal is still 59% of the installed capacity. If you take the generation, it is still 76% of the capacity. We know the renewable, due to the commitment from the government, there are huge renewable penetration happening, but still we can see that coal is going to still dominate till 2050. So this is a major challenge for India, and we have to sort it out, how to manage it. We have heard from other presenters, from Mohsen Asadi also, that there are many ways how we can think. So that is really the challenge to the researchers, that we need to find out that left to itself, we cannot, even with the nationally determined contribution by the government of India, we cannot get away with the coal, but where the coal under many, many circumstances, it will not be able to stay till 2050. India cannot continue with this. So India has to sort it out somehow, and what will be the solution is a big research question. Now coming to Bangladesh, very interestingly, it is growing at 6 to 10%. So any government projection says their energy demand is going to grow at 6 to 10%. But my suggestion is that from Indian perspective, if India's decoupled growth between energy and emission could happen due to energy efficiency, why Bangladesh cannot think of? Very interestingly, when I looked into their all documents, I find that there is no energy efficiency standard policy applied to any of the sectors. So there are off-the-shelf technologies available, we all know globally, but it is not applied in these countries. We all ignored these least developed countries. We thought that they will be growing. But we do not want them to grow inefficiently and then make the wrong choices. So there is huge business potential for that, and so that can be done. And when we talk of energy efficiency, then it is about the technology we know available, policy not existing, so policy needs to be done. And once you have the policy, the market will come, as in India it happened. And so these are the missing investment which can happen, and that can solve the problem. And however, we also want to know how the social sector is doing. Interestingly, Bangladesh social sector is doing much better than India's social sector, because their population growth rate is much lower than India now, and all their fertility, poverty, maternal mortality ratios are coming down because they have really focused on that. And if you look into Bangladesh emission standard, whatever I said, that looks up here with their 2% population share, their emission share is 0.34%. This can be brought to half just by introducing energy efficiency in all the sectors which India has already done over the past 2 decades. And if you look into the other 4, China, Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea, during their fast-growing phase, it is interesting, they're all dependent on fossil fuel. China mostly on coal, Singapore mostly on oil, and Malaysia and South Korea made a combination of all the different fossil fuels. If you look into Bangladesh, their domestic resources, gas, huge gas, and so gas really meets their demand. They are in an even much better position than India, because we use all coal, but they use gas. So there is a huge benefit, so they can use this leverage point. We tried to do that, how the energy sector sustainability is doing over the past 1 decade, when the social sector was doing well. We could see that actually, if you see, then you can see that the social sector is really growing sustainably by all the indicators which is available in the literature. But if you look into environment and economic, environment is really declining because of their fossil fuel still dominating, and the economic sector also fluctuating. So there are different ways how they can, if they go efficiency route, actually both of these will be on the sustainable pathways. So from this point of view, really the question is to meet the reliable supply of electricity, because for Bangladesh, it is the same temperature and humidity zone like India, so their demand, air conditioning demand is also going to grow a lot. So what can be the leapfrog technological solution? So can there be a faster solution, and can there be a just transition? So there is a huge manpower who are trained in gas sector, and there is a huge infrastructure. What can be a sustainable solution for them? And so we looked into the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. I was one of the author of this report, which came out last year, where we could try to see that if you look into just the cooking fuel, and in all these, this whole region, China, Bhutan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, then you can see that these are the, so you can see that access to electricity, how much in different countries, and access to clean fuel for cooking in which country, how much. So there is a huge challenge. They are still using the wood biomass for their cooking. So there is, again, a very leapfrog possible. Instead of going to LPG route, how can electricity be used for cooking? So jumping from here to electricity itself. And we could see that there is a huge hydropower potential in the whole region, but that would mean the regional cooperation and not warring situation. And so the key issue is that there are different kind of inequalities in the society and among the countries existing. So unless we address these inequities, the sustainable development, as it was discussed, that unless you have a deliberative process, then you cannot have a sustainable development. So for that, there is more participation needed. So inequity solution is very important. And also what we need to understand is that globally, some of the countries will be reducing their absolute consumption, maybe the developed countries who have already reached very high income growth rate. But for the least developed countries, they will still be growing, but how can we give them efficiency and the relative decoupling can happen? That is a major challenge, not challenge, major opportunity and business and investment opportunity. So with those words, what we want to say is that we really need to redefine the indicator of humanity's progress. So there has been very long time, most of the Nobel Prize winners in economics have been saying that it is possible to define a new well-being index, and which is not connected to continuous income growth, but health, nutrition, and different growth processes, and which can be taken as an indicator. And if you take that as an indicator, what is the energy implication? That remains to be seen. And so with these words, I'll stop here, and I thank my scholars in AIT and in Global Change Program of Jadavpur University for working with me to produce all these results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, for the wonderful and informative lecture. Now the stage is open for the audience for a few questions.
Thank you, madam, for your very interesting talk, and it was so lucidly presented. But one or two points which have struck to my mind is that is 1 degree rise or 1.5 degrees rise. That is an average temperature.
Global mean surface temperature.
Surface temperature.
Global mean.
Global mean. Now, if the rise is 1.5, will the effect be same for India or America? I don't think it will be.
No, I mean, this is already in the web-based knowledge domain, where you can just download and then see what are the regional impacts going to be.
Right. So in that respect, we are talking about the energy consumption and its reduction and whatever it is, to compare one country with the other should take care of these issues.
Yeah,
Whether
it does. It does. All the literature, if you are aware of the literature, then you will see that it does.
Okay, this is good thing. Then one more thing which you have just pinpointed is the societal demand. So long in this seminar, we had been talking about the technology. But it's very good that you have taken that particular aspect. And in that context, comparing India to Bangladesh won't be, I don't think, it will be because India's diversity is much more than Bangladesh.
It doesn't matter. Because if you are talking about 10% GDP growth, it's the 10% GDP growth. I drink water, you drink water. Doesn't matter whether you call it water, jol or pani or whatever.
Not in that context. I didn't have that in context. What I mean to say, as you have said, that surface cooling demand. You have compared this India with the Bangladesh. But
Because the
Bangladesh
temperature, the temperature and humidity combination, it is almost the same in these two contiguous land.
in Bangladesh and West Bengal, but not Bangladesh and India. Because
No, I did not say India. Yeah, okay. Maybe I made a mistake. Sorry, yeah.
So these are certain things that
Yeah.
struck to my mind. Thank you very
Yeah. Of course. Sure, thank you.
Comparing the GDP of two countries, the Indian base is much larger.
No, don't forget about the base, right? So what I'm saying is the rate of growth in the income.
No, but
I'm not
ultimately-
saying the total base.
Ultimately, it comes to the quantum.
No, I mean, if you say the 10% growth, right? So it's so in your bank account, you might be having 1 lakhs of rupees, and in my bank account, I may be having 100 rupees, right? But it is 6% interest rate. You also enjoy, I also enjoy. So your 6% will add more, and my 6% will add less. That is understandable.
No, but that makes a lot of difference, no?
No, that doesn't. You are making a mistake. What we are saying is that energy growth rate depends on at what rate your GDP is growing. So it is the rate of growth, not the absolute. Absolute will bring in the total amount of energy requirement. But that's a different. So we might be needing, 900 gigawatt of power installation. They might be needing 90 gigawatt. But
No.
it's a rate of growth which we are talking
No, but
about.
comparing a country having a very small base with a country having a very large base, for example, one
So in that case, we should not compare US and India, no?
exactly, and the same way India and India and Bangladesh. same
I
way.
would say that it's important. That's why I realize, I always tell my engineering faculty also that it is important some multidisciplinary training is given, because for economic students, it is very easy to understand why absolute and relative needs to be compared differently, and they are comparable. So I want to say that the countries are comparable. If you take the what indicator you are taking, you are talking of GDP rate of growth. It is not the total amount of GDP. It is the rate of growth, right? So that's what if you take, you can compare. I'm sorry. I mean, we can talk off the line.
Any other questions? No other question. Let us conclude this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roy.